Thanks very much for coming. I've got about 150 slides. It doesn't matter how far back you are, I'm going to spot you if you fall asleep, okay? So try not to. What else? Joe and Paul took all of these amazing photographs that I'm going to show you. One of the standout things about the project, really actually, are Joe and Paul. Because of their ability with trail cameras and photography generally, and IT, unlike me, we've actually got a record of this project that most people would be very envious of. I was at a presentation today about preventing flooding and so on, and they didn't have anything that remotely compared with the photos that we've got. So Joe and Paul are a huge element of how successful it's been. If you have questions, ask them. When you know, I'd much rather you ask something than get frustrated or hot under the collar or whatever. I can't say that I'll have the answer to everything, obviously, but I'll give it a go. Much better for you to ask, and it doesn't matter what it is. If you're thinking it, probably somebody else is thinking it as well. So one question is, why bother to do this at all? There's a lot of You can talk about rewilding in lots of different ways. It can be anything from planting a few trees to doing what I've done, which is go for it a little bit. But, David Attenborough in 2018 said that the defining issue of our time is climate change, and last year was pretty bad. I mean, you had kind of 40 degrees here, didn't you? And people were drawing curtains to keep the sun out. If you'd said that to anybody living here 40 years ago, they'd have thought you were crazy. And that's going to get worse, unfortunately. So we had a drought in Europe. We had a lot of land catching fire all over Europe. Pakistan was inundated, basically. And it's going to cause a lot of displacement of people. It's going to cause all sorts of problems. And I think one of the worries about it is that it's very unpredictable. So it's really quite difficult to predict what's going to happen next and where it's going to happen. So climate change isn't just about summers getting drier, and winters probably getting wetter and warmer. It's also about the events becoming more extreme and becoming more unpredictable as well, I think. And this isn't, this is a fairly worrying situation. We've also got ecological collapse going on. This is a weird little fact that I picked up on the web. That 96% of mammal biomass is now made up of humans and domesticated animals, not wild animals at all. So if you've got children or grandchildren and you're talking to them about giraffes and wildebeest and lions, and you're talking to them about the wrong things, you should be talking to them about cattle and sheep and pigs, because that's most of what the animals on the chickens. Yes, most of what the animals are on the planet now. So unless we do something about that, we potentially have got even more of a problem going on. This is another little thing I found on the web which I quite like. These are the animals on the left that we used to have in Britain, mark you, in the Pleistocene, or the Pleistocene. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it. It's about 120,000 years ago and going back a bit more. But what's interesting is that we used to have straight-tusked elephants. We used to have rhinos. We used to have elk and aurochs and cave hyenas, would you believe? There once were cave hyenas wandering about Roborough. And a lot of our vegetation, a lot of our trees are actually adapted to those animals. So the reason that if you cut an oak down, or an ash, or a beech, or nearly all of our native trees, they'll grow up from the base again. And that's a pretty extraordinary ability when you think about a big tree. Well, the reason is they're actually adapted to these elephants, knocking them over. So our vegetation, and to a certain extent our environment, it is hooked up to a whole set of large herbivores, large animals that simply aren't here anymore. And that's a bit weird. Now the other thing, so this is what we've got currently. We've got a few wild boar wandering about. We've got roe deer and fallow deer and red deer. I have no idea what that is, that tiny blob there. If somebody can identify that for me, then you get a prize. Foxes, badgers, So when we're talking about rewilding, we're not talking about bringing those back. You know, yeah, I know. I quite like cave hyenas, but you know, they may not be the ideal citizen of Roborough, possibly. So we're talking about getting a little bit back. We're certainly not talking about getting this lot back. They apparently did some work in Trafalgar Square a while back, replacing one of the statues or something, and they found hippos and lions. Well, they didn't find hippos and lions. They found the remains of hippos and lions under the ground. So we had all of this going on, and it's gone. And one of the issues is this thing about shifting baseline. We forget what was here in the previous generation. If you start to get old, like me, you remember some of it. But what happens is every generation forgets everything that we've lost previously. You'd have to be pretty old to remember straight-tusked elephants, admittedly, but you get the general idea. So rewilding can help by reversing ecosystem collapse. It's really about creating habitat. That's fundamentally what it's about. Boosting species diversity. It can reduce flooding. One of the other major problems, and certainly, you know, I'm from Edinburgh. We have floods in Edinburgh, but I was amazed driving around Devon. I can't remember when it was, but it was pouring with rain, and the floods. I was absolutely, you know, it's extraordinary the floods that were here, and that's all about drainage, hard standing, you know, field drains, just basically shooting water into the rivers, and then surprise, surprise, you know, towns are built on rivers usually, very often, and they get flooded. Rewilding can help with that by making the ground a bit rougher, and I'll show you a bit about that. You trap carbon. You know, what's driving all of this is carbon dioxide and fossil fuels. And if you've got lots of shares in Exxon and BP, you're doing fine in terms of money. But in terms of the planet, it's not going very well, really. So we need to trap carbon. And also, I don't know about you, but I'm very much cheered by a blackbird singing in the morning, or a robin, or a wren, or whatever it is. I am dismayed by what we've done to our environment. I mean, genuinely, that's why I bought the fields. I'm horrified. It affects me in an emotional way, which is hard to describe. And in Edinburgh, they are building all around us. They've decided they call it Scotland is open for business, but really that means it's for sale, including Mr. Trump up in Aberdeen. And as a result, they are built anywhere where there's money, which it certainly is in Edinburgh. They're building everywhere. It doesn't matter. Greenbelt land, just shift it, build more houses. And this is not a good idea. It really isn't. So, why Roborough? Michael Follen, is that the right? No. Anyway, one of the farmers, yes, asked me, he said to me, is there no land between Edinburgh and Roborough that you could have bought to rewild? And, yeah, Michael, yeah. And, I could see what he was driving at, actually, when I thought about it. But this is one reason. This is the wonderful parish of Roborough. And these two Google satellite images are the same size. They're the same area. They're, I think they're 1.2 kilometres across and about half a kilometre from top to bottom. This is Roborough. There are 50 fields, average field size about 5 acres. And this is near where I am in Edinburgh. This is East Lothian. And that's the same area as that. That's got 50 fields, that's got 7. Average field size around here, about 5 acres. That one's 72 acres, and that one's 58.
Do they have hedges?
No. They don't have hedges, they don't have birds, they don't have amphibians, they hardly have any insects. I mean, what's happened in good land in Scotland is they've just gone for profit. I mean, I understand it, it's the system. But if you've got good flat land with good access and you can get huge machines in, the combines don't even need people. They're automated. They start on one side and they go to the other and they go back again, and there's not even a driver. They're computer driven. But I drive out that way when I'm working, that's the A1, and there is nothing alive in there at all. I mean, there really isn't. I mean, I can't look out the window because it's so depressing. So one reason that we ended up here was somebody sent me, something on the phone saying that there were 10 acres of land for sale here. And I took one look at it and thought, well, if I'm going to try and do an environmental project, I'd much rather do it there than there. Because I do it in East Lothian next 200 years and I get one sparrow. And we were on holiday down here. It's true. It wasn't, yes. Yes, a friend of Janine's sent us the for sale. Yeah. So the two fields in question, we're here, roughly. That's the Everleigh Road going north, and these are the two fields that I bought off Rob. That's where it is. One interesting thing, this is an Ordnance Survey map from 1886. This is the same area, zoomed in a bit. That's the area of the two fields that we bought. Now, what's interesting about this map, which is evidently a long time ago, is one, that there's a little chunk chopped off the bottom that's been sold. There's a hedgerow that's been lost there. But generally, from a very long time ago, the landscape actually hasn't changed very much. The one, which is, from my point of view, quite a good thing. And the reason is you've got these steep valleys, narrow roads, you can't get big machines in here. The soil is heavy. It's not a light, wonderful loam that you can grow wheat on, forever and ever. And so the field sizes have stayed small. The hedgerows, a lot of them are medieval. They're thousands of years old. I mean, if you come from the outside, it's quite an unusual landscape. And for me, as an environmentalist, it's quite extraordinary. The one thing that has changed, which you notice quite a lot, is these little striated areas, I think, are wet. They're marsh areas, they're wetland areas, and quite a lot of that's gone. But other than that, it's pretty similar, really. So we have this wonderful group of people associated with our business in Edinburgh, which is a godsend because digger driver and timber expert, what else? Annie. My wife was photoshopped into this, which you may or may not be able to tell because she wasn't there on the day. So the fact that she looks like a ghost is something to do with that. And yeah, we set up this group to do this project. And we bought the fields in February 2020. We got a baseline survey carried out, and that was great. We got an ecologist company to come in. They actually brought all their guys down. There were about 12 of them camped in the fields for a couple of days. And they surveyed it and recorded all the species. And that gives us a baseline to then compare with all the information that Joe and Paul have produced from the trail cameras. We did some fencing. We did some... Now, the main work involved us coming down with diggers. Because we've got these skills, we were able to do stuff that I suppose some people would find difficult, but partly I do it for a living up in Scotland, and we've got these guys who are very good in diggers who work for us. So they came down, we dug lots of ponds, scraped off lots of turf, made some banks, promptly got reported to the council. So I'd asked the council whether I needed planning permission, and they'd said no. So I just piled in with the diggers, as you do. And then two people from the council turned up with pointy shoes. And I said, do you want to come in and have a look at the fields? And they looked at the fields in the mud and they said, no, you're okay, but you need planning permission. And I said, oh, shoot. So luckily we got retrospective planning permission quite easily. So we didn't have... They described it as engineering works. And it was diggers digging ponds that are no more than about 600-700 mil deep. There's no concrete. There's not even any timber gone in terms of that. So it's, but as soon as they got the idea of what we were doing, they were very helpful. Actually, they were fine. We brought pigs in. We brought sheep in. We brought pigs in. We seeded it, and we brought Neil's cattle in, of which more later. So the baseline report found 237 species. In really, effectively 2 years since we did the work, we're up to 486. I cannot tell you how rewarding it is doing this stuff. Seriously. If you can do some of it, it really helps you sleep at night. It's wonderful. The other thing about it is it's quite unpredictable. So as long as you stick to basic guidelines, you can't really do anything wrong. Because you're working with biology, it's relatively easy to do, and you'll do something, and either you'll get the result you want, which is great, or you'll get something completely unpredictable, which there's a very reasonable chance is actually better. It's a tremendously rewarding thing to do. And because you're working with nature and with the processes, you're not working against them, which is a lot of what happens on the land. It tends to work, and sometimes it works in ways which you can't even imagine, which if anything is better. What else? Yeah, so we've got masses of birds and animals and plants and insects that have come in.
Is that flora and fauna, or just
flora and fauna? Yeah, both. Yeah. Okay, so this is what we've done. That's the Everleigh Road. That's the two fields. We've split the front field into 3, and we've done that with fencing. I'm not particularly a fan of fencing, but the big advantage of fencing is, funny enough, it stops livestock moving around. So we wanted to use livestock to do things to the ground. We didn't want to use machines, so we had to fence it. So the front field, we put these fences in and split it into 3. So there's lane side, funny enough, because next to the lane. There's the meadow, which is the central section, and then there's my wife's corner, Annie's corner. We don't really know why, but there it is. And then there's the back field, and that can also be isolated because there's a gate. And all that is all I've got is 10 acres. I want to do different things, to try different things, and therefore you've got to split them up. If I had 20,000 hectares, for example, it'd be a lot easier. It's a bit small, fundamentally, but you can see that's the front field. Paul has a drone. I was going to make a joke about droning on, but I'm not going to. It shows you, there are the fences. You can see how the different treatments have produced quite different results. That's the meadow in the centre. There's part of Laneside, and that's Annie's corner with a big pond in it. So quite quickly, just using slightly different techniques, you can change things. So the front field, that's what it looked like when we bought it. If you remember those cypressus trees, they'll give you a landmark. It's a typical sheep-grazed field. It's agricultural, so it's meant to produce sheep. In terms of biodiversity, it's pretty poor, really. That's another part of it, and there's a bit of soft rush, juncus growing where it's wet. One of the things you don't realise about the land is how much it's drained. If you go in here like we did and dig ponds and do stuff, you hit a field drain about every 10 metres. About the width of this hall, something like that. And that's what a lot of that causes the flooding. So you're often unaware of what's under the ground, certainly. And that's why you get fields like this, because they've been drained and they've been sown and they're managed for the ryegrass. So we needed to change that, and because we've got this landscaping business, because we know about it, we know about these. I'm not very keen on machines. I'm very whatever the word is, non-machinist, whatever the word. But if you're doing the right things with diggers and good guys, this is Stephen Mack. He's one of the smiliest people I've ever known. He almost permanently has a smile on his face. So he used to work for us at the Water Gems. And what we did was we scraped the turf off and made banks. And this is a really simple thing you can do. Diggers are relatively inexpensive in terms of hiring them. But what happens if you take the turf off is you take the grass away, you take some of the nutrients out, and you take a lot of the grass seed away, and what you're left with is something that then starts to turn into something that's not just grass. It's a very simple thing to do. It's very effective, and if you pile the banks up, things grow really well. Things like hedgerow species grow really well in banks. The reason is that the soil is often compacted and waterlogged, and you fluff it up and turn it over, and hedgerow species and things will grow really rapidly, which is what we wanted. While we were doing it, I was thinking, I wonder what the people on the other side of the valley think about this. because it looks pretty awful. But that's, clearly that's just at the beginning. So part of Laneside, we stripped the turf, we created these banks. And then you can either seed into these cut areas, or like we did, you can just leave them alone and see what happens, which is actually much more exciting. The one thing we did do, somebody was talking about earlier, was we sowed yellow rattle. So rattle is, that's the seed. That's what it looks like when it's little. And that's what it looks like when it's big. It's rather an odd looking thing. I don't know what it reminds you of, but it looks kind of alien parrot type thing. It's a bit strange. But it's a hemiparasite of grass. It's an annual, you need to sow it in the autumn because it needs to get frost on it. But what it does is, it knocks the grass out. It's really effective at doing that. And that means once you knock the grass out, you can get more flower. So, for example, this is in Edinburgh where we've done it in my local park. You can see the very long grass, almost no flower. This is the rattle coming in from the right. And as the rattle comes in, you get clover and buttercup and other things coming in after it. So it's great from the point of view of changing grassland into something that's more diverse in terms of flower. I mean, it's another thing about the Devon landscape. The hedgerows are fantastic, a lot of the woodlands are fantastic. There's not actually a lot of flower. Not a huge amount, partly because of the grazing, I suppose. So in Laneside, we'd scrape the turf off. And you remember, there's the cupressus tree. This is 1 year later. So we've gone from maybe 3 species of grass to that in a year, just by scraping that much off the top. Red campion, buttercup, speedwell, foxglove, some kind of thistle. If anybody can tell me what kind of thistle that is, you definitely get 2 pieces of cake. And if you're a bumblebee, that's a very, very different place from the one before. Teasel, forget-me-not, plantain, even dandelions. Again, if you're a bee or a bumblebee early in the spring, there's not much food, a dandelion's a great thing. Another part of the Laneside, down the bottom, just filled up with buttercups. But again, that's a different thing. This is Scarlet Pimpernel. These photos are great. That thing is actually about 3 millimeters across. Looks really impressive on Paul's photo, but it's a tiny little thing. Little wild pansies and toadflax. So one of the aims was just to try and get more flower, just for the bees. It's not very complicated. We literally just taken diggers in, scraped the turf off, flipped it over into banks, and we've got all this flower. And all we did was sow with yellow rattle. But you do need a bit of courage, because when you do that, it looks a hell of a mess to start with. The other thing that you're trying to do, there's the cupressus again, so that's the same area. You're trying to create what you might call roughness. Smooth grass fields, they shed water very quickly, there's nowhere for anything to hide, there's no structure. And our environment, historically, wouldn't have been like that. It would have been much, much rougher, much less organised, much less tidy. So it doesn't look like much, but you've got probably different grass species, docks, thistles. There's just more going on in here. There are more places for things to live, really. That's the back of the Laneside hedgerow. So obviously you've got to cut the hedgerow on the road, because otherwise you'd become very, very unpopular very rapidly. But that's the other side of it in the field, and you can see it's connecting up with the bank that we planted up. Masses of thistles. These are white willows, which I really like. This is the upwind side. You put something like white willow in, they will literally be 80 feet high in about 10 years. So you can create a windbreak. That's the other thing I noticed. Again, coming from the outside, you notice things that local people are just so used to. It's very windy. And that's yeah, okay, there you go. But I didn't. If you're outside Devon, you think of custard, cream and sunshine, and then you come down here and it rains on you for a week and you get blown flat and you think, wait a minute, you know. So creating a bit of a shelter belt's a good idea on the upwind side, which certainly these guys will do in about 10, 15 years. Another thing that I'm conscious of is, how do I say this? So that you might get species that local landowners don't like. Thistles, docks, things like this, which may spread and cause problems. Hasn't happened, I don't think, but if you look at this ground, and again, that's Laneside, that's the central meadow, these are docks. And we got a lot of docks initially, but I don't very much mind docks. They're great for winter seed, for birds. I think there are lots and lots of goldfinches in the fields at the moment and other finches because they're feeding on the seed. But the other thing is if you trust the kind of natural processes, you get a lot of docks, you get a lot of green dock beetles. You know, there's a food supply there, you're not spraying it, you're not doing anything unnatural to it. You've got a big food supply, you quite often get an insect that will wipe it out. So we got lots of docks, we then got millions of green dock beetles, which ate them. So we don't really have, we still have docks, but it's not like the whole place is wall to wall. Joe was very worried. That you still are. Trust in the process. That we would get problems with docks, and we haven't really. And Neck, you know, this famous massive rewilding estate that is in Sussex, they had this problem with thistles, and they had millions and millions of thistles, and they were on the verge of trying to do something about them, and they held their nerve. And one year, something that ate thistles, some little insect turned up, and the next year they had 10 thistles instead of 20 million. So we brought the diggers in the front field, and we dug ponds. Well, what we did was we scraped the turf and we built banks, and we discovered that if you do that in Devon, you end up with ponds. That's just, you know, whether you want them or not, really. But we did, especially as we're water specialists back in Edinburgh. There's my dog. So we got these ponds, and initially we made some effort to put topsoil around them, but they go muddy inevitably because you've cut the ground and you've got water, so it washes the clay in. The other thing that, again, you will all know about, but I didn't know, Devon clay is not like Scottish clay. Scottish clay holds water. Devon clay sometimes holds water and sometimes doesn't. It's completely different. It's very interesting. So anyway, we dug down into the clay subsoil, and we did that on various scales. And I don't know, 16 ponds. I don't know how many we've got. This is Stephen's pond, who was the smiley chap you saw earlier. But one of the interesting things about them, there are quite a lot of interesting things about them actually, is how rapidly they clear. So they cleared extremely quickly, and you can also see how rapidly the vegetation caught up on the outside. This is partly because we made a bit of an effort with any topsoil to put it around the banks rather than just leaving cut banks of clay, because that would have taken a long time to vegetate, I suspect. But they clear very, very rapidly, and this is in a year. This is Potomac Eden, it's a common pondweed, and in it came. And I have no idea how these plants get into the water, but they do very rapidly. You certainly don't need to plant biodiversity ponds because they fill up with life, including plants, extremely quickly. The other thing that they do is that they store water. So initially, you want a full pond. You think of ponds as things full of water, but actually, natural ponds would have fluctuated massively if they haven't got a stream running into them. This is Stephen's pond. Can I do this? Yeah. A month later in the drought last summer, and you can see how much it's gone down. Animals use these shallow areas a lot, much more so than the deep areas. Actually, the shallow areas are really good. But just as importantly, 4 months later, it looks like that. Now that's a lot of water that pond's holding that would have just shot straight out the field drains and straight into the stream and straight into what's the nearest river? Torridge. Torridge, yeah. You know, that's a lot of water that pond's holding that isn't just shooting straight off the catchment. So they do a really, really good job about that. You get them that are kind of dryish, kind of nearly completely dry and completely dry. But that happens in the summer, it rains in the autumn, and that stores a lot of water. And also, the other thing is, these are actually very valuable and very different. So a pond that holds water all year has a certain plant community in it. That one doesn't have the same plant community in it at all, because it will only grow things that can grow in a very short space of time, and then they'll get wiped out. So these different kinds of ponds that dry up and don't dry up are totally different. And one of the things I didn't realise is just how useful these things are. Animals use them a lot. Okay, so the other thing we did in Laneside, this is Kevin, another one of the Water Gems guys, in that February, was make turf banks and plant. So we planted hedgerows. As I said, it's quite windy. You need some shelter, basically. We also spent quite a lot of time lying on the ground because we'd slipped over and it was just, yeah. Kevin just ended up laughing because he couldn't actually stand up at all. We planted these whips, native hawthorn, gean, I don't know, all the native shrubs, hazel, etc. And one of the things, again, that I didn't know, if you plant them in Edinburgh, when you plant them, they're about 2/3 of the way up the tube, and about 4 years later, they're about that height. They'll grow about that much a year. In Devon, it's just, I mean, I couldn't believe it. That's 1 year's growth. They've gone from 300 mil high to over a metre in a year. Absolutely incredible. I also expected the roe deer to munch the whole lot, and for reasons best known to themselves, mostly they haven't. Lots of roe deer, but very little damage, actually. We stopped cutting the hedgerows, so we got a lot more flower. Things like crabapple, and then hawthorn and berries. Just stopping hitting them with a flail, basically. Sloes. You can make gin with them as well. I'm sure Janine does that. She looks like that kind of person. In Annie's corner of the front field, we put up a kestrel box, of which quite a lot more later. This is Darren, Smiler from the village. He brought in bales for me, just more structure, more organic matter. Brash. We tip piles of concrete. Doesn't matter what it is. If you're a rabbit or a vole or a mouse or a stoat, which we've now got, you don't care whether that's concrete or sandstone or quartz or whatever. You know. It's just habitat. It's something to get underneath, get away from the weather, hide from predators, and you'd be amazed what a difference these things make. Because suddenly these animals have just got somewhere to live. It's as simple as that. Brash is really good because you can literally cut a piece of willow from the hedgerow and shove it in. And because the rabbits can't get to it, it'll grow and turn into a willow. You just need roughness and structure. Every now and again, another major difference between Edinburgh and here is in Edinburgh I have tree surgeons dumping deadwood in my local park. So I came down here and said to some of the tree surgeons around here, can you just dump some wood in my field? And they just fell off their chairs laughing because it's all sold for firewood. Nobody's going to give you beautiful, ash or something firewood. They think you're completely crazy. So deadwood is very, very valuable environmentally for all the bugs and the fungi and all the rest of it. So the only way that, apart from the brash, that we got some was the big ash was cut down on the corner there, on that Eberley Road a while back, and Dean and Sophie, the tenant farmers, they took a big chunk of it into the fields for us. But Joe wasn't sure that they would know which bit to take. So she's gone along and tied a bit of pink wool on it just in case they don't recognise a 4-ton piece of ash that's lying in their field and get the wrong one. Anyway, so that's Joe identifying it in case they miss it, and that's it in the field. And it'll be there, that's going to be there for a very long time, and will be a fantastic resource. The other thing that's happened in the fields is we've got jays picking up acorns, shoving them into the turf, and we're getting little oaks sprouting up. And when that happens, we put a sleeve around them and protect them. Except that Neil's cattle went and munched them all when they went in there. But, okay. The middle meadow, we did something different. We wanted to try and encourage floral diversity in a different way. So we're missing all these Pleistocene herbivores. So we use proxies, sheep and pigs and cattle. And what they're doing fundamentally is knocking the grass back and stopping succession. So if you just leave a field alone, what will happen is the grass will get longer, and things like hawthorn and blackthorn will start to run out from the hedges. Seeds will get into it, and it will turn into scrub. And it's called succession of vegetation. And the scrub will turn into woodland, and the woodland will form closed canopy. And actually, closed canopy woodland isn't very good for biodiversity. It's relatively poor. And the reason for that is that the vegetation is knocked back by all these big herbivores, which we haven't got anymore. So what you're trying to do, the reason that NEP has been so successful is that A, they're loaded, and they're aristocrats, and this is England after all, and B, they've had a huge area, and that means that they can get, longhorn cattle and Tamworth pigs living on their land, and they don't do so much damage that they're a problem. They keep the vegetation from succeeding, and where you get a lot of life is actually in a kind of dynamic equilibrium where things are going slightly backwards and forwards, but you're not over there and you're not over there. So we, in our own little way, we try to do the same thing. If you apply the kind of equations for how many cattle you need on land or how many pigs, for 10 acres you need about a quarter of a long-hauled cow and about an eighth of a Tamworth pig. Well, since that's difficult to achieve, you just bust them in a group. There's Joe and Paul trying to ingratiate themselves with a Shetland sheep, which I think worked. The Shetlands didn't do a great deal. They knocked the grass back a bit. But these guys, these really, really made a difference. The big advantage we had was that by sheer luck, they came in when it was wet. If you put them, I think, into dry ground, they can't get into the ground. But if it's wet, this was the first day. The magic number seems to be 9 for some reason. I don't know why. Anyway, there were 9 of these. And these are Tamworth pigs. And half the time they almost disappear. They're just, presumably they're eating grass roots, they're eating all the insects in the ground. What I don't understand is how a pig can ingest that much stuff, given that its snout is in the soil, without actually just filling up the soil. I don't understand the mechanics of it at all. But my God. And so we wanted to get rid of the grass in order to get more flour. And I don't know how long they were there, but it wasn't very long. A couple of months maybe. They massacred the middle section, which is what we wanted them to do. And then we seeded it, a place called Goran Farm Seeds, somewhere around here. And we just stuck the usual kind of native stuff in. And although it doesn't look very exciting, you can see how much space there is in there, how little grass there is there. And then these are all broad-leaved flowers that are going to pop up. So that was last summer. So I'm very much looking forward to this spring to seeing how it goes. That's bird's foot trefoil, and that's popped up all over the middle section. And bird's foot trefoil, there are apparently 2. There's a bird's foot trefoil and there's a greater bird's foot trefoil. And that little thing supports 130 species, over 130 species of insects. So to you and me, that doesn't look like anything. But there are 130 species of insects that aren't in that field when that's not there, and possibly potentially are when it is. You know, that's quite a difference. Okay, so there they are. I don't know about you, but I think they're fab. They're absolutely brilliant. They're not too big, so they're not too frightening. They don't, they're not too heavy. They're not going to break your feet. They've got lovely little curly foreheads. They're local native breed. I don't know anything about animals, but if I could choose an animal, I'd actually have these. These are Neil's. He brought them in very kindly. They probably ate all the bales, which that's fine. If you notice, there's a buzzard sat there, waiting for all the voles and the mice that get kicked out of the hay bale when they start munching it. But they did a really good job of grazing down the grass, and I'll show you a bit later on. They had a real go at the backfield as well. We also got these. So if you're prepared to sift through fairly recent cow dung with your hands, you find dung beetles. So I only noticed that one, but look, there's a baby one. There's another one as well. So these were another addition. In the backfield was very wet. I suspect people have been trying to drain it for hundreds of years and just not been able to. There are field drains all through this, but it was still very wet when we bought it, but that suited us fine because we like water. So there's Stuart, another one of the guys, in a digger coming in, and we dug a lot of ponds. And you can see how the soil structure changes. Typically you have about 400 mil of topsoil, and then you hit something else, either yellow clay or, I learned something today, that this is apparently called gley, and it's where there's no oxygen and the iron is grey. Anyway, so yeah, we dug lots of ponds, and this is a wide angle view of the backfield after we finished. We put up a barn owl box. That's a structure for swallows, which the swallows have refused to have anything to do with under any circumstances. You can see the ponds, and that's again one of Paul's brilliant drone photos. So there's Stephen's Pond in the front field. There's the gate through to backfield, and these are all the ponds. Initially, I thought about putting a borehole in, and I'm very, very glad that I didn't, because that would have kept them all full, and I wouldn't have realised just how valuable this thing is about them going up and down. Same thing in the backfield. Muddy to start with, and very rapidly, within a year, clearing. And this, I don't know why, but clear water is very, very beautiful and attractive, and muddy water kind of isn't. The top one is quite deep. It's actually about shoulder depth, and it's very interesting how the wildlife doesn't use it really. They use all these shallow things that are going up and down. I mean, the frog spawn just now in the fields is in 4 inches of water. It's actually sticking out of the surface. And that's because shallow water is warm. If you're a tadpole, you'll develop 3 times as fast in shallow warm water as you will in there. And they just simply don't use it at all. Don't lay eggs in it at all. So you want shallow ponds, really. That's an aerial view. Again, an aerial view looking east. That's the backfield. And that's just the contrast. You know, I was talking about roughness and structure. Well, that's what the backfield looks like, and that's what the local fields look like. I mean, it's not surprising. They're used for agriculture, and I'm trying to do something completely different. But you can see the contrast. That's greater bird's foot trefoil in the backfield. That's valerian. No, is it? Yes, that's right. That's some kind of thistle. Field bedstraw, marsh pea, ragged robin. Lots of ragged robin now, really beautiful. Hemlock water drop wort. I have almost none of this in Scotland, and here it's everywhere. Apparently quite poisonous, but assuming you don't go around grazing on it, it's probably okay. The cattle didn't seem to have any problem with it. They ignore it, I guess. So this is the cattle in the backfield. I've never seen anything eat juncus, soft rush, these guys just munch their way through it. I personally think that these cattle are adapted to this, to that kind of grazing. You give them the option, they go straight over to the hedgerow and start eating the willow. I mean, Neil knows a million times more about it than I do. But it was very noticeable that they obviously like grass, and they don't eat that out of preference, I don't think. I think this was after they've been in there a while. But they do very much appear to, they like browsing, certainly. They went straight for the willow. And I suspect it probably does them a lot of good. I mean, if they've got a varied diet, instead of just grass. And they just looked really at home in the fields. This is them, what you would call in arboricultural terms, crown lifting the willows. They basically just ate everything they could reach. But that, again, that's fine by me. And what they're doing is they're stopping the succession of the vegetation, which quite quickly actually would cover that back field in bramble and in scrub and then woodland. And they just look very happy, and they make me slightly nervous because they're in this backfield with 12 ponds, and actually they did very little damage. They made one. They were quite odd. They fixated on one pond, and they spent quite a lot of time in that one, and they didn't pay much attention to the others. But even that one has recovered perfectly well, and that's partly because we used to have all these big herbivores. The ecosystem is adapted to things like this. We just don't have them. We don't let them loose in our environment anymore. The other thing they did, literally from one day to the next, is there was a bit of a hedgerow that they couldn't get at because it had bramble in it this high, and they just flattened it. If you're a cow, bramble appears to be no obstacle at all. So they just created this highway down the side of the hedgerow and then went in after the willow. That's a goat willow in the backfield, and you can see what they do. So they don't kill the tree. Again, this is because these willows are adapted to big herbivores. It doesn't kill the tree at all. Even if they smash it off at this height, it'll just grow from the base again. It's completely adapted to that kind of stuff going on. Now, if you've got a fruit tree or something you're growing as a crop, you don't want that happening to it, But if that's not the case, that just stops that thing getting big and taking over. This is the only pond that was in the backfield before we bought the land, and this is after the cattle have been in. You can see they've munched, all this lovely kind of wet weed. So that's after the cattle have been in, and that's what it looked like before they went in. An impact they have, but this is Glyceria. This will just cover the pond really quite rapidly, whereas they've stopped that. So they'll keep the open water. They'll keep the different structure and the different habitat. And the other thing they do is poach the ground up a bit. Not huge amounts. I was surprised at how little of that there was, but they've created gaps for other plants to come in. The other thing, we went up the trees and put these barn owl boxes up. So that's barn owl box. Barn owl hasn't really had anything to do with it at all. Jackdaws love it. It's one of the things. So given that one didn't work, that's Ross from the village with his scaffolding, and we went to a huge amount of trouble winching up this huge pole, dragging it down the field by hand, winching it up into the air, concreting it in, and Stuart's on top of the scaffolding. He told me under no circumstances was I ever to show his wife this photograph, in case he'd fallen off. And this is made by Paul. This has loads of baffles in it. We were supposed to be baffling the jackdaws. And very unusually, this actually does seem to have worked, in that what happens is you've got all these baffles in front of, behind the hole in the box. The jackdaws go in with big twigs, and they just can't get in. I wish I had some film of them trying to get in, but we haven't. And actually, it does seem to have worked. They haven't filled this box up with sticks. On the other hand, neither do we have any barn house nesting. But you can't have everything. So that's what we did. not complex. Couple of diggers, decent couple of digger drivers, scrape the turf, make banks, make some ponds, get some animals in. I think one of the I'm slightly mad about this stuff, so that helps. And B, I don't have to make any money out of this. We bought the fields. I'm never gonna. That money's gone. I'm going to put it into a charity which we're setting up. It's just what we've done. It's not like we have loads of money, but I thought it was quite an important thing to do. So you have constraints if you're trying to make money off the land. It's a completely different situation, clearly. So you then have compromises about how much you can do, how much you can't do. But I think once we've had our cake, which I'm very much looking forward to, I'll show you the animals and the plants that came in. But it isn't complicated. It's actually relatively easy to do if you're interested in it. And it has tremendous rewards in all sorts of different ways. And one of the things I really like about it is how things happen that you don't think are going to happen. So it's much less predictable than, let's say, farming or building things, or and now that side of it I really like. Okay. Any questions? Anybody want to say anything?
How long did you leave the cattle in there?
How long were they there, Neil?
Yeah, 2 months were they?
Yeah, nearly 2 months. And Neil kept an eye on them for me, and I every now and again, and Joe and Paul sent me photos, and I'd get these photos and think, oh my God, they're eating all the willow, they're trampling all the ponds. And actually, when I came down, they hadn't done very much of that. Yeah, so a couple of months, and there were 9 of them, and are they yearlings? Is that right, Neil?
They were yearlings.
Yearlings, yeah.
What you tend to do then? Bring them every so often, every year for
Yes.
2 months?
So what I'll do is look at the vegetation, and as long as Neil is happy to bring them in.
It's after most of the flowering is done.
Yes.
It's like September, so we wait for it all to set seed.
Yes.
Then put the cattle in after.
Yes.
At the end of the season.
Yes. Absolutely. And if it doesn't need doing 1 year, you just skip it. And if things start to really kind of get overgrown and there's too much succession, you might put them in for a bit longer. It does depend on you having somebody very kind and helpful like Neil to help you with it. But if you have got that, and I think these cattle aren't incredibly rare in Devon, as far as I know, they're perfect. They're not too big, they're not too destructive, and it seems to suit the cattle as well. Yeah. Okay, right. So those were some of the things that we did in the fields, and then this second section is basically what happened. So this, assuming it works when I click it, Joe and Paul have got these trail cameras, and they're triggered by movement, and they spend hours sifting through it and piecing videos together. So these are all videos of things that happened in the fields. This is the swallow shelter, and the swallows have steadfastly ignored it. But also, John Paul put a little owl box, which is a bird box for little owls, on the inside with a hole for little owls. And not surprisingly, little owls are relatively little. But nobody told the local birds that it was supposed to be for little owls. So this is what happened. There we go. Yeah. So this is a great tip, and nobody's told it that it's meant to be for little owls, this box. And this great tit spent what must have been a very considerable amount of time entirely filling this quite large owl box with material and nested in it. The second bird that nobody told this was a little owl box is this male kestrel. And as you can see, he spends a considerable amount of time. He's not very good with dimensions. He's trying to get in, and it's very much smaller than him. And the female was inside, presumably trying to get in from the other side. And there she goes. This is the kestrel box, and that's not a kestrel. That's a barn owl, and nobody told him either. So in he goes. And very rapidly thereafter, that's a tawny owl. And tawny owls and barn owls do not get on, let me tell you. That's the tawny owl throwing the barn owl out of the kestrel box. Anybody know what this bird is? Brilliant. We've got a hall full of ornithologists. Kingfisher. Kingfishers eat fish. No, they don't. So this kingfisher is feasting on dragonfly larvae in what is now called Kingfisher Pond. I didn't know kingfishers ate dragonfly larvae. This one just sat there and stuffed himself with them. Now he's sitting on the trail camera. This is a heron. We were talking to somebody, the heron nicked somebody's koi who's sitting back there. This is probably the same one. He's just eaten a dragonfly. Again, news to me that herons eat dragonflies. It sticks in his throat, actually. He has to have a drink of water to get rid of it. So all these things happen that you don't actually expect. This is one of Darren's bales. That's the male kestrel again. Now, I warn you, this bit of the video, it ought to be X-rated. It's a little bit graphic. Okay, that's the female, and that's what happens if you're kestrels in the spring. It's a necessary thing before they lay eggs and have a family. But what I quite like about this is the way that having happened, the female just stands there, and the male goes through this very elaborate ritual of look how I've done, look how important I am, and generally kind of shows off for a while. Again, there you go. Again, something that we didn't know would happen. Something much more predictable, and the ponds are full of now, is frog spawn. Build ponds and you get lots of frog spawn. Frogs are great, apart from the fact that they are just great on their own. Lots of things eat them as well. They're an important part of the ecosystem. These are toads, lots of toads as well. The difference is the spawn is in long strings with toads. They tend to walk rather than hop, and they live a very long time, toads. The skin is poisonous. I've actually watched a crow slit one down the middle and skin it in order to eat the inside, which is not a pleasant thing. But all these ponds that we've dug have resulted in masses and masses of tadpoles of all descriptions. Tens of thousands of them, and they'll grow up, spread out into the rough grass and the soft rush and so on, and come back and breed. Is that a frog or a toad? Toad, well done, very good. Toad, yes, a little toad. Something else, this is a newt larvae. I don't know how they got there or anything else, but we have frogs, toads and newts very rapidly. This is the shell, exuvia, of an emperor dragonfly, and we have very rapidly got very large numbers of dragonflies in the fields. It helps that there are ponds nearby in the valley, I'm sure. So emperors live for about 3 years, 4 years, sometimes even under the water as larvae, and then they crawl up, split, and the adult comes out, and that's the male adult, and they're big. They're that kind of size. They're fantastic things. Very beautiful. They're a pioneer species, I think, so they tend to come into new ponds. But I suspect we'll have them this year as well. That's the female. A lot of them lay eggs underwater, and that's what she's doing. These are azure damselflies. I'm not very good with names of things, so I might have to actually check out what these guys are. Yeah, azure damselflies. And again, she's laying eggs under the surface. These are all photos taken by Paul. There's the surface of the water. She's laying an egg on the Potomac stem under the water. He holds on to her. That is a southern hawker dragonfly, and unusually, again something I didn't know happens, this one lays eggs in damp moss. At the sides of ponds, they hatch and the little larvae hop into the water. Incredible photographs and very beautiful. Four-spotted chaser, dragonfly, and there are so many down there that you take a photograph of one and you get two kind of bonus ones in the background. And that's the azure damselfly again. But look how beautiful they are. Phenomenal things. Emerald damselfly. Absolutely beautiful. This is golden ringed. This is the biggest one of all, and these are massive things. They live for kind of 5 years under the water in order to get enough food to end up this size. But they're absolutely beautiful, huge dragonfly. Tortoiseshell caterpillars, tortoiseshell butterfly caterpillars, just nettles. There's one corner of the field that's got lots of nettles in it. Nettles like nutrients. Areas of an old midden or anything where you dump organic matter, you'll get nettles. And then there are lots of butterflies whose larvae feed on them. But most people don't like nettles. Painted lady butterfly, common blue butterfly, something called a deer fly. I just couldn't believe the colours that this tiny little thing has. I think it's only about kind of half a centimetre long or something. It's not very big, but incredibly beautiful. Lots of moles. I like moles. Some people don't, apparently. But they have a habit of coming up underneath the trees that you've planted for some reason. I don't know why. Which tends not to do the trees very much good. Roe deer. Lots of roe deer. And they will clear fences from a standing start. They just wander up to these sheep fences and just hop them. So there's no barrier. But again, for reasons I'm not sure of, they haven't bothered many of the trees. It was one of the worries that I had, that they would just nibble the trees down all the time. They're browsers. They like growing points. And they've done a little bit of that, but not as much as I thought they would. Blue tits. So Paul put these these blue tit boxes up and put one up in an alder tree in the back field, went to put another one up, turned around, and this blue tit was trying to get in literally 40 seconds after he put it up. And there she is. And apparently they'll stay put if you lift the lid. If you lift the lid slowly. Right, okay. And then you get that, and it's hard to miss the feed me message, really, with these. We lost one of them, clearly, but yeah, you can't really mistake where to put the food, can you? Okay, what's that? Vole, yeah, short-tailed field vole. And these are just fodder. They breed very rapidly, and it's a good job because everything eats them. Stoats, weasels, grass snakes, foxes, cats, somebody said, barn owls, tawny owl, I mean everything. It's a pretty tough life, really. But if you have rough grassland and soft rush and structure, you get lots of these guys, and if you get lots of those guys, you get everything that depends on them, like the kestrels and the barn owls and the tawny owls. That's one of the things that eats them. That's a grass snake. Lots, I mean dozens and dozens of grass snakes in the fields. Rob, who owned the fields before us, has a compost heap, which Alan now has. Where's Alan? Right, there you go. I'm sure, well, I don't know. In your compost heap, you have breeding. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And the females are actually quite significant. Joe nearly stepped on one and got a bit of a surprise. They're quite big reptiles. But they're fabulous things. They don't bite. They won't hurt you. If you look closely enough at the snake eye, that's Paul photographing it. Just to prove that these are not photos that we've just kind of pulled out and put in. Yeah. Oh, here's another video. Let's see if this works. Yeah, these are ravens. Ravens used to be quite relatively rare, and they've stopped being persecuted. And they're much more common. They fly over, just north of here, over the fields every day. I was very aware of them when I was working in the fields because they make this very distinctive sound. These two guys have come down to have a look, probably because the kestrels are leaving bits of vole on the bale. You can tell they're ravens, a very heavy beak and almost a beard underneath. Highly intelligent. Somebody's let a shotgun off there and that's frightened him, but he calms down again quite quickly. Buzzard, he's come into the fields. Again, they'll be here because of all the voles. He's sitting on one of the fence posts, and along comes a magpie, and he takes a very dim view of magpies by the look of it. He just kind of looks down his nose at it until it goes away. So, Stephen's Pond, these are house martins, which have been nesting in the village, picking out mud for the nests. And along comes a swallow as well, has a drink. The ponds are just full of life. Moorhen, and yeah, Mr. Fox. And when you see things like this, it's interesting. A, they share the space, but they still manage to coexist. And B, it's very obvious that predators mostly operate on movement. So this moorhen is just frozen solid, and the fox doesn't notice it at all. They react very much to movement, I think. This is a snipe. There are, yesterday when I was in the field, there were 6 or 7 anyway, in the backfield, and they love these bits of shallow water and the mud. I can't get over the beak. Imagine flying around with that stuck on the front of your face. Yeah, I don't know how they don't bang into things or get stuck. This is a tawny owl. This is the one that you hear calling at night, and it turns out it's a slightly reluctant bather. There's a bit of tiptoeing going on there, but he, like that Stephen's Pond, again you notice the water's dropped, he's in the shallow water, he's having a bath. I didn't know tawny owls had baths. He's going to get all soggy, you wouldn't think you'd be able to fly. But there you go, the trail camera picks it up at night. That's, 200 metres down the hill. There he is on a bit of the ash, again, that we put in the water. And off he goes. These are wood mice, bouncing around. That's a hole under the fence into the field, just downhill. And they're quite good at climbing grass stalks. They're not quite so good on wire. They're not adapted for fence wire, I don't think. And there's who. And again, it's using the same run as the wood mice, but 10 minutes later. This is the last set of photos. You'd be very glad to hear. This is the male kestrel again, and this time the right bird has found the right box. Pitched up in the spring, box was put up in the winter. Things like kestrels, I suspect, don't have many nest sites. They tend to nest in very old trees. There aren't that many very old trees in the landscape. So he pitched up, and we got very excited. That's the female. She pitched up next, even more excited. And then he started bringing in, as that short-tailed field vole again, fodder. But to get to that stage, he spent about a month fighting off jackdaws. So the jackdaws will all clan together, all get together in kind of big family group and try and nest in this box. And he single-handedly fended them off and went on doing that for a very long time, actually. So he's feeding the female. There he is with the kind of grisly remains. And then one chick with its head stuck out, which was fantastic. And this is, very rapidly after we put the box up, and will be partly almost, directly a result of all the voles that we've got in the fields now, because we're not cutting it and grazing it. Yeah, they have. So the young ones have this kind of yellow surround to the eye, which shows you that they're young. So we had 1, then we had 2. So Joe and Paul are sending an email saying there were 2. If you look closely, big brother, medium brother, little sister, let's say. So then 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it must have got quite crowded in there. So we then knew we had 4. Kestrels are doing incredibly badly. I don't know how much they've dropped by in the last 15 years, but it's probably 80%. Their population's just fallen through the floor. When I was a boy, I used to drive along motorways and see one every half a mile, and that just doesn't happen anymore. So they're a great thing to have. There they are, messing about on Darren's Bale again with the trail cameras. So that's the one taking the footage of the box, which is up here, and that one's looking at the bale. And I think Paul took these from an adapted toilet tent. Is that right?
Correct.
Yes. But then, if you can count past 4, which I can just about, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in fact, we had 5 young kestrels fledged, which is quite a big brood. In the first year, this one's trying to take a selfie, I think. But again, lots of voles, the right habitat, and a bunch of kestrels. We call that chick on a stick. This is them gradually, getting towards adulthood, developing the plumage. They hung around in the fields for quite a long time. This one beginning to get the darker plumage, I think, and starting to be more like an adult. And then this is the last video. This is them, in fact, it's the last slide. This is them messing about on the bale. They found a bit of old mouse or something, and they get on. Unlike, as I understand it, quite a lot of birds of prey, where if there's not much food, the bigger one will eat the little one. The kestrels seem to get on really well, generally. I mean, they're having a bit of a mess about, but and eventually the oldest one gets fed up and goes out the front, and the little one goes out the back. But they're just fantastic little falcons. And they're called wind hovers, and their mastery of the air is just extraordinary. But they need quite a lot of food items. I can't remember what the numbers are, but to feed 5 of them, those adults are having to bring in, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 prey items maybe in a day, I'm guessing. It's quite a lot. And if they run out at any point, they'll all start to die. There you go. So thanks very much for putting up with it, and it's been great to have the privilege. Yeah.
What about plans for going forward? Have you got anything in mind that you've not already created?
Well, I think it's very much land specific. So I would very much like to have more land. I just don't have any money to do it. I think so we've set up a charity, and these fields which currently are in Annie and my name, we own them. We'll put them into the charity, and what we'd like to do is get access to more land, either to help people manage it, or ideally to actually be able to buy it. But I think it depends very much on the land that you've got. So that backfield runs with water. So I've got some of the field drains up onto the surface, and that's why we've got all these snipe and the grass snakes, and we've been able to do all these ponds. The front field was completely different. And if you had woodland, that would be different. If you had a valley, that would be different. If you had the tops of something, that would be different. So I think it does depend on the land you've got. But very much I think it's amazing having access to land. It's such a privilege. I never even dreamed of the possibility. And just the ability to kind of mold the environment, I think is an amazing thing, which probably people who've had land for a long time take for granted. But if you're somebody like me, I never dreamed I could get access to it. So that's the idea, is do as much of it as possible under the auspices of the charitable trust.
Yeah.
Okay.
Charity.
Yeah. No.
It's a trust.
All right. Thanks very much, and you are very welcome. You're very welcome for more cake. Otherwise, we'll have to take it home. Thanks very much.